A liberation that never was. 7 decades of repression in Tibet. The People's Liberation Army of China invaded Tibet in 1950. Since then, Tibet has remained under its iron-fisted control. Over the last 65 years, the Chinese government has employed a myriad of repressive policies to sinicize the identity, history, and culture of the Tibetan people. From the mass surveillance of the everyday lives of Tibetans to the harrowing experiences of those placed in Chinese detention centers, the Chinese government has continued to subject Tibetans to suffocating control and the use of increased state violence. Tibetans face intense surveillance in their daily lives, with security cameras, police checkpoints, and party officials monitoring their movements and activities. Peaceful protests are suppressed with severe violence. Protesters are imprisoned and tortured, while many lose their lives, either executed or unable to bear the extremities of their sentence. China has repeatedly violated international conventions through extensive use of torture on Tibetan political prisoners. The thousands that languish in the prisons in Tibet are detained for simply expressing their desire for freedom. They are arrested and convicted for peaceful acts, such as waving the Tibetan flag, calling for the return of the Dalai Lama, and sending information about events in Tibet abroad. Many Tibetans are imprisoned on unclear or unspecified charges, their families not informed of their whereabouts. They are denied access to proper legal support and face trials that do not respect international standards of justice. Human Rights Watch have called China's security system in Tibet alarming. Despite the existing heavy security presence and the lack of violent threats to the state, the Chinese government is expanding its intrusive monitoring across the region with the introduction of the grid management system, iris scanning, and the DNA sample collection targeting men, women, monks, nuns, and children for DNA collection outside of any ongoing criminal investigation. Even children are not spared from the incessant abuse of their freedom and human rights. Under the People's Republic of China, the Tibetan language, religion, and their way of life are heavily suppressed. Tibetan Buddhism is seen as a threat to the occupying Chinese state and is tightly regulated, with Chinese officials closely monitoring and controlling religious activities at monasteries and nunneries. Monastic management committees, established on the order of the state, have become the norm and regulate every aspect of monastic life. Thousands of monks, nuns, and students have been forcibly evicted from traditional monastic learning centers such as Larungar and Yachingar, while these centers that have stood the test of time for hundreds of years are being demolished under the guise of development. Writers, singers, artists, and teachers are jailed for celebrating Tibetan national identity and for any criticism of China's rule. Tibetan school children are also being denied classes in their mother tongue and increasingly being taught in Chinese instead. Village schools have been forced to shut down. Around 800,000 to 900,000 Tibetan children have been separated from their families and forced to undergo education in colonial boarding schools, a blatant attempt to strip them from their Tibetan identity, language, and heritage, which Beijing deem as a threat to its occupation.
那我们也知道这里是寄宿制学校，对不对？平时都见不到父母。
对，很少见父母。
那你们有没有什么话想要跟自己的父母说？
China has incentivized Chinese migration into Tibet, leading to fears of assimilation and marginalization as thousands of Han migrants and tourists pour into Tibetan cities and towns. Thriving tourism, infrastructure, and construction projects in Tibet primarily award jobs to Chinese migrants. Travel for Tibetans is restricted, with police checkpoints monitoring movement and permits required to visit the so-called sensitive religious areas. A researcher has highlighted massively Han-dominated employment in Tibet in the year 2020. China is using Tibet's rich natural resources, including gold, copper, and water, to fuel its economic and industrial expansion. Its exploitation disregards the needs and desires of local Tibetan communities, even as they cause pollution, kill livestock, and destroy Tibet's fragile ecosystem. Tibetans who protest against mining, damming, and other resource extractions are routinely met with violence and repression by security forces, such as the recent peaceful protest in Derge against the construction of a hydroelectric power plant that resulted in the arrest of more than 1,000 Tibetans by the Chinese authorities. China has used economic incentives and brute force to move over 2 million Tibetan nomads from the land they have lived off for generations into urban settlements, Without the skills to obtain work in an urban environment, nomads face poverty, unemployment, and social exclusion. In the face of oppression and authoritarianism, Tibetans continue to rise up against CCP's rule and assert their demands for freedom. Today, the struggle is harder than ever, as the Chinese government adopts ever more advanced technology and uses increasingly brutal tactics to crack down on dissent. A new generation of Tibetans are fighting back against all odds. As the Chinese Communist Party attempts to maintain its iron grip over Tibet, controlling the region's vast resources as well as its people, Tibetan culture, religion, and language are being eroded to the point of extinction. From the issues of environmental exploitation and nomadic displacement to religious restrictions and oppressive policing, the Tibetan people risk their personal safety and freedom to make sure their voices are heard through artistic protest, peace marches, sharing information to the outside world, and even to the point of self-immolating. Since 2009, 157 Tibetans from all walks of life, Tibetans who were students, monks and nuns, mothers and fathers, farmers and nomads, have self-immolated, protesting Chinese government's repression in Tibet. In 2012, the self-immolation spiked to 85 in a year. According to Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy, since 1990, there are 5,628 Tibetan political prisoners, 2,751 Tibetans held incommunicado detention, and over 3,000 cases of Tibetans who have disappeared after arrest by the Chinese government. Assessing the political prisoner database of the United States Congressional Executive Commission on China, which has tracked cases in China from 1981 through 2018, the Hong Kong Free Press reported that nearly half of those behind bars were Tibetans. With a population of just 6 million Tibetans, where the total population of China is more than 1 billion, the number of detained Tibetans is disproportionately high. Professor Carol McGranahan has also stated that there are more foreign journalists in North Korea than Tibet. Freedom House has ranked Tibet among the worst places in the world for civil rights and political freedom. Time magazine declared that the Tibetan self-immolation was the most underreported story of 2011. Reporters Without Borders ranked China 179 out of the 180 countries on its Press Freedom Index 2023.
Samaram, Jacka Berkaiga Charasiatonga. Give a gunjan, Kavi Jonti Kanas on the Rio. Give a gunjan, Kavi Jonti Kanas on the Nayanika. Yanga Nimea. Kavi Tandoin Yang. On your Kavi Johnson. Random Chaluk Daran Garn do something at Motaria. Can you hint them that you give the John Goria?